The U.S. House of Representatives has approved H.R. 1, the For the People Act. It would lead to widespread changes in election law nationwide. Jon Guze, Senior Fellow in Legal Studies at the Locke Foundation, joins us to discuss the bill. And John, you've been following this process closely. You have a lot of concerns about it.
I do. I feel if the Senate passes this and the president signs it into law, this will be a disaster for our country, I think.
Why so?
What this does, well, of course, it's a huge bill, and it does all kinds of things, many of which I don't like. It erodes donor privacy, for instance, which is an issue we care about, and we could talk about that later. But my main concern about it is we've already got a situation in this country where something like half the country suspects that the last election was, if not fraudulent, at least full of irregularities that make them lose confidence in the electoral system. This bill is going to make all that worse. It's going to further undermine our sense in this country that we can change our leaders through the democratic process. I think that's just going to be a disaster.
Is your concern tied to the fact that this basically nationalizes a lot of the electoral process rather than leaving it to the states?
Well, partly, but it's also the specific ways they want to change it at the national level. Now, the very fact that they're doing it at the national level is a problem, and at least as far as the election of the president is concerned, is probably unconstitutional. But what we're really seeing here is the Democrats using their power, their slim majority in Congress, to make all the changes to state election laws that they've had on their wish list since 2019. They want to do things like early voting, all or at least no fault absentee voting, extending receipt deadlines, eliminating witness requirements, all these things which they wanted to do because they knew it would help them harvest more votes, which is their modus operandi. But the problem with all these things is they make fraud easier and they make the appearance of fraud inevitable. And that's why I think these changes are so bad.
Another piece of this is that if you nationalize so many of these policies, the decisions come down to a handful of people in Washington, rather than having different processes in what are sometimes described as the laboratories of democracy. That has to cause some concerns.
It does. I mean, that concerns me as well. And, I can easily see what's going to happen 2 years from now if the Republicans retake the House. We could see this all flip again. We don't want to have the whole country's elections laws changing every time the party that has a majority in Congress changes. I mean, that's going to create uncertainty and doubts about the process in and of itself. It's just not the way this is supposed to happen.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet is the fact that this major, large bill also includes some major changes in campaign finance, the Federal Elections Commission itself, changing it from being an equal bipartisan group to being a 5-member group with supposedly a fifth vote beyond the two members each from the major parties. The operations of elections themselves would have widespread sweeping changes under this bill. That has to cause at least some red flags.
Well, of course, all of them do. But the thing that worries me the most about the things you mentioned is the effect this is going to have on public discourse. A lot of these things are presented as an attempt to get so-called dark money out of politics, to stop the rich from controlling the process. But nothing could be further from the truth. The way our system works, or works at its best, we have to have open discussion about political issues. And when you increase the extent to which organizations like ours are required to reveal the names of their donors, that subjects those donors to retaliation if the organization is helping them express ideas which are unpopular in certain quarters. That has a chilling effect on public expression, on freedom of expression. We just can't let that happen. But it's part of the whole culture. Sometimes it's called cancel culture. It's this new attack on freedom of freedom of speech and freedom of the press that we're seeing from the left. This is just another manifestation of it. But that would undermine an important part of what makes our Republican system work: the free exchange of ideas and the ability to express your your disappointment, your dissatisfaction with the existing policies of the government.
I've heard some people describe H.R. 1 as the pathway toward one-party rule. Does that sound like hyperbole to you, or is this a legitimate concern?
It's not hyperbole. It's a very legitimate concern. Among the things in this bill that would help ensure one-party rule, of course, all the ballot harvesting provisions help the Democrats because they go after they depend on demographic groups that are less likely to show up at the polls left to themselves. So they go out and get them and they harvest those ballots. More importantly, though, for example, there's a provision in the bill that federalizes redistricting. Redistricting, if you read what the Democratic strategists are writing, this is the key to their hopes to capture the federal government in Washington on a permanent basis. If they can redistrict enough of the House and Senate districts around the country, they can ensure that they get Democratic majorities for the foreseeable future. Another thing which is not in the bill, but it's part of this push, is to add states so that they get more safe Republican seats in the Senate. I think probably not surprisingly, they would like to see one-party rule in this country, and this would be a step in that direction, no doubt.
And I think you're talking about safe Democratic seats in the Senate. I'm guessing.
Did I say Republican?
I'm guessing the Democrats don't want safe Republican seats.
Not at all. We're talking about Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico in particular, both of which the assumption is, and I think it's a safe assumption, would vote reliably for Democrats for the U.S. Senate and for the House, but it's the Senate that they really have their eye on with that particular move.
Serious concerns about H.R. 1, called the For the People Act, but that doesn't necessarily seem like the greatest title for what would be a Nationalization of Elections Act. One person who will continue to watch very closely as this legislation moves forward is Jon Guze, Senior Fellow in Legal Studies at the Locke Foundation. Jon, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.